Hello and welcome to this special transmission on the 10 years of APS tragedy that has hit Pakistan back in 2014, something that we're still trying to fathom and of course deal with, particularly of course those who have lost their very, very precious young children. It was something that everybody got really shook about, and this is something of course that Pakistan had to unfortunately make a part of its history. In 2014, when terrorists attacked Army Public School in Peshawar, this was of course something very, very unfortunate that school children were blatantly targeted and murdered, and we have lost very much precious lives because of this particular incident. And this is of course highly condemnable, and whatever we can say about it is less, and there is no way that we can ease the suffering of those who lost their children on that very day. But 10 years later, we're dealing with the threat of terrorism once again, and we're of course faced with a lot of new issues with regards to the kind of threats that have emerged, the kind of groups that have emerged, and of course with the situation in Afghanistan as well. And while we of course talk about a way forward and a renewed resolve in Azm-e-Istikam, we also need to look back over the 10 years of the history of the war against terrorism, particularly after APS, and then of course with regards to the National Action Plan that was formulated in the aftermath of this tragedy, and then of course in the ways that it was reviewed a couple of years back, and how we need to take a look at the ways that we deal with the issue of terrorism, and how do we provide justice to those who unfortunately are the victims of these terrorist attacks, and of course how to make Pakistan a secure place in a world and an international community where we have of course Afghanistan right around the corner, and we have the spread of international terrorism. That is going to be our focus in the show today, and we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the 10 years with regards to where Pakistan stands today and what needs to be done moving forward. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Faisal, and we've also been joined online by Brigadier retired Raashid Wali Janjua, who's Director of Research, IPRI. Thank you very much, Janjua sahab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. And I'll start with you first with whatever you want to say and comment on with regards to looking back over the 10 years of the APS tragedy and as we remember the horrific day.
Thanks, Anna. 10 years ago, I think 16th of December was a very gory reminder of the terror that stalked our land, and it still stalks our land. And TTP, which was responsible for APS massacre in 2014, is still perpetrating the same violence in our merged districts and KPK region. 16 December 2014 was a very dastardly act in which 7 terrorists, they entered the APS Peshawar, and they made their way to the auditorium. Probably they were very well informed, and before they entered, they used one of the vehicles as a feint, which they burned to divert the attention of a quick reaction force. And then once that quick reaction force was diverted momentarily, these 7 terrorists, they made their way, killed the guard, and entered the auditorium where a first aid demonstration was being organized. And it was full of students, both the senior and the junior classes. And without any hesitation, these beasts, they started displaying their true traits of bestiality by spraying the kids with the bullets. And that was a complete mayhem, carnage. And the principal of the school, she was also caught in this violence, and she tried her best to organize and guide the students towards the safety. But since these armed terrorists, they were spraying the bullets, they were resorting to this indiscriminate firing. From auditorium, they went into the administrative block, and there was a soldier from one of the battalions nearby who entered on his own initiative, and he started challenging them, and their attention got diverted. They thought probably quick reaction force has come to confront them. So they did not go towards a toddler's section on the right side. Had they gone there, it would have been a bigger tragedy. And that soldier laid down his life, but diverted them enough. And then the SSG came and eliminated all 7 terrorists. But it was a very, very, costly operation in which we lost 150 students. And out of those, 134 were the school children, some staff of the school. And obviously, I mentioned a soldier also. The 12 SSG uh, soldiers who participated in the operation, they were also injured, and but they gave an excellent account of themselves and eliminated these 7 terrorists. So this was a, such a event that shook the entire country, and there were many apologists for the entities like TTP, who also went into a kind of a hibernation because the public opinion turned against the terror, and the government took certain measures like re-implementation of death sentence, and then the 20-point national action plan was a result. A new operation was planned against TTP. The entire nation was galvanized. The clear and present danger that this terror presented to the security of lives and material of people was highlighted in stark relief. And from there onwards, I think that was a watershed moment in which there were many fence sitters, and there were many people who were dithering, many apologists. So they all were, eclipsed, and the nation got a certain clarity that this is a battle that we need to win, because these people have nothing to do with religion, humanity, and this is a menace that needs to be tackled head on. And that is the kind of resolve that the nation showed after that incident, that resulted in operations, and those operations resulted in complete elimination of these entities from Pakistani soil, obviously at a very high cost of the precious blood of our shaheeds. But these were eliminated, and 20-point national action plan was introduced, which was supposed to take care of terrorism and countering the violence as well. And some of those points have been very well implemented, but there are few on which we have still some reservations. For instance, the 10th point was very, very important, and that was registration and regulation of religious seminaries. So I'm amazed that still a debate is going on, and a mainstream political party, which is a religious political party, JUI, is contesting the right of state to implement the registration process and put all madrasas under the education department. Well, in any civilized country, there wouldn't have been any debate on that issue. But here, because of the petty, expedient political interests, there is an entity which is still contesting and trying to make some extract some political concessions out of this. Now, there are other things like modification of the criminal justice system. I think that's also an area which needs a lot of attention, because the conviction rate of the terrorists who are nabbed in these operations by CTD and paramilitary organization and army, the conviction rate is so low that it demoralizes not only the law enforcement agencies but encourages the terrorists as well. So we need to have a very deep and urgent look at this aspect, that what are those inhibitors that still stop the criminal justice system from being modified in order to speedily convict those terrorists. Then there were things like establishing dedicated counterterrorism force. CTD has been strengthened, but a lot needs to be done on that score. And the CTD element, which is front and center, needs to be buttressed with better quality human resource and better quality of resources. And I think one of the provinces, Punjab, has taken a lead, but KP is still catching up, and it has to catch up a lot. Unless this counter-terrorism force is strong enough, we cannot leave this counter-terrorism operations entirely to paramilitary forces and armed forces, because basically the world over, the first responders against terrorism are the counter-terrorism departments of police. Now, militant outfits and armed groups were not supposed to be allowed to operate in the country as per the National Action Plan, but we know that those were given space, and in the garb of parlays, they were allowed to be resettled, they reoccupied those spaces, they re-energized their cells, and now we are paying the price in the face of, in the shape of spike in violence and terrorism. In 2023, there were, I think, around 800 casualties. And ever since 2021, once the Americans left, there has been a steady rise in the graph, which indicates the unwillingness of Afghan interim government to rein in these non-state actors like TTP operating from Afghan soil. So those terror acts are being orchestrated from the Afghan hideouts, and despite our best diplomatic efforts, all those efforts have come a cropper so far.
Right, absolutely. And that is very essential to where we stand today. And Faisal, I want your perspective on that, particularly also in terms of the ways in which we have developed strategies and approaches to counter the threat of terrorism. And I'll, of course, come to the aspect of where Afghanistan lies today as well. But moving on from 2014 and then, of course, the National Action Plan and how it evolved and to where we stand today, has there been a reevaluation of the ways in which we understand terrorism and the ways that we understand these terrorist groups and the ways that we now deal with TTP? Of course, we have renamed it as Fitna al-Kharij and we deal with it accordingly as well. And then, of course, there is the threat coming in, emerging from Afghanistan with safe havens being provided. So how has our strategy changed accordingly?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Sana. Obviously, when we talk about that particular day, I mean, when unfortunately, of course, so many of the kids, they were brutally martyred that day by the monsters we are, of course, still fighting against. And that very particular day, they chosen APS. By the way, APS is the very school I went to as well, but in a different city. And to me, all of the APS schools, they were always like my own schools and my own colleges. And when it comes to that particular day, it actually shook me, shook the whole world, I must say. It wasn't only about the Pakistan, but the indication was truly clear, and that is that not only they are against education, but they are against the kids as well. They are against the kids who actually spoke the same language as them. I'm talking about TTP. They had no regard for kids. They had no regard for education. They had no regard for civilian lives. They were simply, terrorizing the whole Pakistan. And at that time, of course, we know that Chief of the Army Staff of that time, General Raheel Sharif, he came up with an excellent resort, and it was straightforward that simply go after them, even if they are in their hideouts, search them and bust them there. And that is what was happening at that time. And of course, if we talk about the civilian government at that time, the whole support by all of the political parties was with the military, and it stayed for a long time. But down the line, I think when it comes to different sort of civilian setups, I mean, there are certain things that were renegotiated that shouldn't have been done. The resolve should have been straightforward. Wherever you find them, simply shoot them, and this is the only resolve that should be there for such heinous terrorists. And if we talk about in current times, I mean, at that time, of course, we remember APS school wasn't the only incident that took place. There was another bomb blast that took place, and the similar kind of terrorist activity was carried out in a university as well. If I'm not wrong, it was Mardan's University, Farrukh, if you can, yeah. And in that, of course, it was the similar case. So the message was clear. These education centers and universities and colleges, they were considered at that time by these monsters as the easy targets, because they couldn't find and they couldn't fight with the military, they couldn't fight with the men, so they chosen little kids to fight against. And them little kids, they were courageous enough to even show their chests, and they took the bullets for the country at that day, I must say. And even the teachers
shouldn't have to.
Yeah, shouldn't have to, but even the teachers, they were standing with the kids in there, and they laid their lives for the country. And I want to highlight one of such examples. I mean, there was this family, Nawaz Khan's family, in which of course one of his son, the eldest son, he gave his life. The other one, he took bullets, and them bullets, he could not be treated in Pakistan. They had to take him to Britain, and UK's government at that time, they of course extended their help, and they took him there. And I'm talking about Ahmad Nawaz, who ended up in Oxford University. This year he ended his graduation from there, and obviously till last year he was the president of the Oxford Union of Students, which is a remarkable achievement for somebody who was, of course, victim of that attack. And this was the kind of statement, this was the kind of example we of course had to show to all of these monsters, that no matter how hard you try to stop our achievements, to stop our education, to stop our kids to go to school, here we are busting up again, coming up again, and showing you that we can make a difference. And that day, all of the students, I'm pretty much sure that all of the students who gave lives that day, they were equally capable of doing wonders like Ahmad Nawaz did. And I think that was the point when all of the differences, they were set aside by all of the political parties. And currently, if we look at the current situation, of course, we are facing quite similar situation, but now we are seeing that Army's approach is proactive approach, in which of course we are seeing more and more IBOs are being conducted, and the magnitude of IBOs is so high that these kind of incidents, I mean, God forbid that any kind of this kind of incident happens again. But of course, we must be thankful to our security forces, our military, our intelligence services, that they are so proactively working against these monsters that we are feeling safe. And when it comes to, of course, the very people who are across the border, where they plan everything, where they get money from our enemies, everything they are provided, their facilitations and financings, and after getting that, they come towards Pakistan, and they of course carry out these kind of activities. Against that, the resolve which I see is of course missing to certain extent is that at that time, 10 years ago, all of the political parties, they were on the same page, and they were a resolve, an iron fist from Pakistan, which was showed to the terrorists at that time. And this time, that somewhere down the line lacks in terms, because there isn't few of the political parties, they are not as sort of on board as they must be, they should be. And I think all of the political parties, they need to sit down again when it comes to fighting against the terrorism. Every single political party, every single Pakistani, they need to stand shoulder to shoulder along with the Pakistan's military forces, security forces, intelligence services, to fight this menace, because we should, God forbid, that we ever get another of the incident like this, before that happens, we have to be like an iron fist, so that ever if they think about coming back again towards us, they know that we are united against them.
Right, and that is of course important, but I also want to take a closer look at the way that we are going to be dealing with this, both in terms of the military element and the political element. And Farrukh, I want your take on that, and you've of course gone in depth with the National Action Plan. You've interviewed the National Security Advisor a couple of years ago, and I want your perspective on how we have evolved with that plan, or has that been left out in its elements in certain ways, and how have we now transformed it in one way or the other, and when we're actually dealing with the threat of terrorism, and that too both politically and also in terms of our security personnel, in terms of what the military establishment or the armed forces and security personnel are acting on, and how the political aspects are manifesting themselves.
Right. Thank you very much, Sana. Fancy that you actually start with a question about National Security Advisor and his interview and evolution. We have evolved so much that we don't have any National Security Advisor any longer. But I wanted to actually comment on, on that day also, with your permission.
Yes, go ahead, of course.
Because that, for a country that has actually gone through one conflict or the other throughout its life, it is very difficult to have a dearth of dark days. But I think that this day was the darkest in my lived memory. Of course, when it comes to December 16, it has other connotations also because of East Pakistan and whatever happened. But now, 10 years ago, I had never thought that after 10 years, we will still be discussing this matter, and I would feel equally heartbroken. And I think that that is because the kind of helplessness, the attack was not only merely on children, it wasn't merely a terrorist attack, it was attack on our social contract and my faith in it, right? My own children were in school, and these are the things that one takes for granted. And at that time when I heard about this attack, the first thing was to worry about my own kids, and I rushed and I picked them from the school, right? And after that, I did not allow them to go back to school for many days. Even schools opened, and I wouldn't let them go. And the day when they went back to school, eventually, and that was thanks to, Faisal was talking about General Trial Sharif, there was a video song also that came in those days. In the end, there's a message in that, and that was welcome back to school, right? And then I heard the army chief also saying that this will never allow to happen again. So I took my kids back to the school. Now they are all grown up, but at that time they were like toddlers. And I took them to school, and then I sat outside the school for the entire day, for many days. Wife said, why are you sitting there? Do you think you will be able to stop terrorists? I said, no, but I will die before my kids, and I will know that at least I did whatever I could to stop it. Right? This is the state of affairs throughout the country. That was the sentiment throughout the country, and I think nothing has changed. But when it comes to evolution, Sana, when it comes to, and by the way, let me also praise three people who actually played a very, very mature role. Of course, we talk about Army Chief because that is the kinetic force that was confronting terrorism. And I think after that, the tide turned because of Zerbiazov, right? That was a very effective project. But the President Zardari, Asif Ali Zardari, was at that time party chief, and he took this initiative of organizing the APC. That actually led us to this National Action Plan. And then at that time, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mian Nawaz Sharif, also played a very constructive role. Other politicians also joined in, but that was willy-nilly. We know what exactly was going on in Islamabad streets, and it took people some convincing to come to the table. But when it comes to consensus, Sana, do you think that we were able to hold that consensus for long? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right? My biggest problem is that because we don't want to actually have a 360 angle approach to the issue, a three-dimensional approach. What happens is that because we leave out the difficult conversations, in the end those conversations come back to haunt us. And this is exactly what happened. Of course, army took, the lead in fighting terrorism, and we saw that those pockets were done away with. Then Radul Fasad also came, and we kept on actually building on that momentum until we actually were not able to keep focus, and we ended up reversing everything. But here's the thing. There are two regions or two aspects that you have to look at. One, the media or narrative space. The second one, the biggest, most populous province in the country. When General Musharraf actually agreed to be a part of war on terror, at that time Pakistan did not have a parliament, Pakistan did not have any kind of democratic means to convince people. So what happened, and at that time I think TORs were also such that you couldn't actually go out and create a complex narrative where you could convince the people. In the end, what happened was that because this country has been actually brought up with the narrative of al-jihad, wal-jihad, right? In the end, we actually ended up losing that narrative to the other side. And that is a problem. Then the most populous province of the country, for some reason, terrorist activities were more focused on other parts of the country. In Punjab, because Punjab is very populous, perhaps, and there were umpteen attacks there as well. But because there wasn't anything that big that would stand out, in the end what happened? Pakistan's intellectual elite are mostly from Punjab, media anchors and all. And then most of them are from Urdu medium, where all these narratives of 1990s, 1980s still stood. So in the end what happened was that the narrative was actually, while the state continued to fight terrorism, there was a break from the intelligentsia, so to speak, those populist voices on television that actually would either not play along, or then would go for some whispering campaign. For example, creating some kind of conspiracy theory. Within 4 days of APS Peshawar, I have seen programs on television, somehow creating some kind of doubt about everything. With that kind of people actually calling shot, what happens? Populist voice actually transcends. And one of the populist political parties never, bought the narrative of the state. When it came to power in government, immediately what it did, not immediately, but by the end of its term, it ended up reversing all the momentum, especially because of Taliban had taken over as well. With that kind of affairs, Sana, we need to actually ask ourselves what's wrong with us. Do we have a death wish? Even today. By the way, remember, just to make people realize, 10 years is a long time. In 10 years, kids actually grow up. I just mentioned my own children. But there are others who must be schoolgoers who are now in the army and fighting terrorism, right? With that kind of, age that we have spent, why is it that we haven't been able to keep focus? One example that I never understood. Pakistan used to have a distinct day for martyrs. There used to be a Martyrs' Day, there used to be an observation of Martyrs' Day in the evening, and there would be an event where people actually told story, and we used to honor the martyrs. When General Bajwa came, all of a sudden he merged 2 days, Pakistan Defence Day and Pakistan Martyrs' Day. And I couldn't understand very gradually that Martyrs' Day was removed from our memory. You have to keep reminding people what we are losing and what we have lost. But that was something, and by the way, by the end of his term also, we reversed everything that was done in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, because we ended up bringing back those people that we had banished from Pakistan. So there has to be some kind of accountability, Sana, and there has to be a counter narrative. It took us 10 years, remember, 10 years. Quran is very clear about suicide being haram in Islam. There's no negotiation about it. But it took us 10 years to figure out that if suicide is haram, suicide bombing cannot be halal. And even today, I hear people who are justifying it, because we haven't been able to build on the narrative And then, of course, if I expect our lower judiciary, even senior, higher judiciary, if I expect my parliamentarians, if I expect my school teachers, my TV anchors to believe what the state's narrative is, in the end, what happens? In the end, the problem is they are also coming from the same community. They end up using the same kind of jargon and seeing everything. Pakistan versus Islam should never be an issue. Pakistan and Islam go together. But what kind of Islam? The one that kills kids, right? And this is an honest question and an honest discussion. Another big issue. Because of the nature of war on terror, our communities, Pakistan expat communities in various countries, particularly in UK, that went through hell. And Pakistani state could not do much for them. They turned equally reactionary as others. And in the end, now what is happening is that the tail is now wagging the dog. Their radicalism is coming back to haunt us, and that is why we have to implement all this media firewalls and everything, because we allowed our people to be lost in the way of radicalism. And there has to be a massive, massive approach. Firewalls are all well and good, but then you have to offer a counter narrative. Where is that? I look at television sets, particularly prime time, and I don't see, talk shows ever talking about these things. There are few people who might, but in the end, there is some kind of, manipulation of words, and in the end, what you realize is that their heart is not in it. So we have to ask ourselves, what is wrong? Do we have a death wish? If not, why is it that 10 years later, after getting that consensus, we dropped the ball so massively during the previous government, and while the current leadership is showing great resolve, and my hat's off to them, but I think it all has to start with a conversation about accountability.
Absolutely, and I was just coming to that, and Janjua Sahab, I want your take on that, because we have spoken about accountability, particularly since last year, and particularly, of course, in terms of many elements with regards to the previous regime, as Farrukh was mentioning. But in terms of actual action and actual consequence, actual accountability, there seems to be still a lot of gaps in what we're taking a look at, and we have the last 10 years to actually gain some perspective on whether or not we have held people accountable, and whether that may be from the military establishment, maybe from the government, maybe from the religious elite. It is important to hold people accountable who are associated in one way or the other with terrorism in the country and with damaging the interests of the country. And so I want your take on, while we talk about accountability, how is it that we actually ensure it's done across all of these elements?
I agree with you that accountability is an aspect that we have neglected. And that is why the chickens are coming home to roost again. There are two dimensions actually. One is ideological and one is the governance. And on both, what is the scarlet thread is the rule of law. You see, we keep talking of nostrums and we keep offering panaceas. Nostrums are counterterrorism actions, kinetic steps, but the real panacea is the rule of law. Unless we establish that, and accountability is part of that bigger, it's a subset of that bigger set, that is the rule of law. And I'm reminded of the ideological dimension here. I was there 7 days after this gory incident. I visited and I investigated, I discussed the issue with the affectees also. And I came to know that such was the insentient and heartless, act, that those killers, once they entered and they started spraying bullets, they first asked, and they were probably in communication with their handlers, and the communication intercepts showed that they asked their handlers, look, you told us to kill the infidels, but here these are mashuman, these are children. So what does Sharia say? So their handlers, equally heartless and cruel, they passed back the communication that don't worry, they are old enough to be killed. So this is the kind of madness on ideological plane that we need to address. And we have the hatcheries of extremism in the shape of those madrasas, which impart a kind of a peculiar worldview, which could be used by any terrorist entity to sway these minds, which are unidimensional, and uh, they're depriving them of the education, also ensures that they cannot get integrated into the work stream, and which limits their choices. And once the choices are limited, the ideological factor, it overwhelms their thinking, and those could be used as cannon fodder for any terrorist entity. So this is an aspect we need. Registration of madrasas, we need to take this aspect very, very seriously. And then we need to ensure that the financial checks and the checks, whether this financial flow is from some external source that is inimical to the interest of Pakistan or not. And then we need to integrate the normal education subjects in their curricula, so that their curriculum is capable of imparting choices, and we wean away our impressionable youth, which we have left out as the recipients of social safety net in the shape of this madrasa network. These 32,272 madrasas, according to National Counter Violent Extremism Guidelines 2018. Now, out of them, only 18,000 have chosen to be registered under DG Religious Education of the Education Department, which was a consensus. And once these national counter-violent extremism guidelines were passed by NACTA, so we have to, be consistent and assertive in ensuring that these policies are implemented. Second dimension is the governance aspect. You see, once the state abdicates its responsibility of providing the public goods and service delivery, there are no livelihoods, there are no health, education, and basic infrastructure like drinking water, etc. Then those segments of population fall prey to non-state actors who start acting like a state and start dispensing justice, start arbitrating, start dispute resolution. That is precisely the situation now which is obtaining in merged districts. And that is why we see that these terrorist entities find space there. So we need to squeeze spaces through governance. We need to wean them away ideologically, and we need to introduce a real uh, face of Islam, which is tolerant, which is pluralistic, and which is accommodated of diversity. And we need to ensure that both these strands move side by side, effectively, consistently, and political differences and political expediencies and petty interests do not come in the way of this counter violent extremism strategy, as well as counter terrorism strategy.
Right. And Janjua Sahab, I also want your take in terms of the narrative part as well. You mentioned the kind of narrative building that is there within the terrorist groups and how that has been put forward. There is, of course, the counter narratives that we create as well, and that of course, is there in terms of the ways that people perceive the armed forces and the ways that people perceive the threat of terrorism and how we're actually dealing with that. And so I want your take on what you think of the kind of narrative that has been built by the ISPR, by the military, by the government of Pakistan in terms of what we are faced with and what we're dealing with. Is that narrative gaining the kind of influence that it showed, or the kind of momentum or impact that it showed, or what it aims to achieve?
You see, on narrative part, a lot has been done. It was, in fact, point number 11 of National Action Plan, that ban on glorification of terrorist entities on media, both print and electronic, and then dissemination of a better counter narrative. Paigam-e Pakistan was one such attempt, and that's, I think, very comprehensive and very inclusive. But the trouble is that dissemination part has not been that effective. We have done our best by way of sensitizing the public of the menace of terrorism. But what perhaps is amiss is the integration of the political entities into this process so that all political units, all political parties and the provincial governments, they come on board. And if one political government looks the other way and is not, focused on disseminating the right narratives, rather the existing narratives are diluted by way of spreading fake news and by way of deification of a political cult figure. I think what they probably uh, fail to understand is that ultimately not only would they be loser, but the entire society would suffer because this political squabbling uh, will ultimately get resolved. But the wounds that are inflicted because of this infighting and lack of clarity of presenting a unified narrative against terrorism and extremism would go a long way and haunt the same people who are now wrangling because of the petty political differences. So this needs to be understood by all political parties and entities that political fragmentation and political polarization, this is a poisonous chalice for fighting, for all the attempts to fight the terrorism. And this, the sooner we understand, the better.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us, Janjua Sahab, and being a part of the discussion today. Farrukh, you wanted to add something?
Right. There are two quick points that I actually wanted to highlight, Sana. One is regarding accountability. The other one is regarding narrative. Narrative building is not merely actually coming up with Paigam-e-Pakistan or telling what is right or wrong. It is also about reclaiming the words or language that we lost to terrorists. For example, jihad. How much effort have we done to actually reclaim the term and explain to the people that this actually means something bigger than just qital, right? Similarly, there are umpteen other things, particularly regarding nation state. The concept of nation state, remember there was a Malaysian edict about nation state being reality now and Islamic reality now. We haven't actually been able to counter the fact that last ijtihad that was popular and that was accepted happened 1000 years ago when there was no concept of nation states, and because of that the riyasat's concept was basically an empire. And now everybody who is actually using intelligence card actually ends up building a support for that kind of empire, undercutting Pakistan's right to exist. The second thing that is very important, Sana, accountability. Here is a timeline for you. Pakistan during PTI's time in the final days was negotiating with TTP. All of a sudden, two people retire, General Faiz and General Bajwa, and what happens? But TTP actually breaks off from dialogue. And that is not all. Earlier, Brigadier Sahab was talking about Maulana Fazl Rahman. He goes to, after the Afghan Taliban taking over, he goes to Afghanistan, comes back a changed man, and all of a sudden, every time, there is two-part act. Every time Afghanistan's government actually feels heat, all of a sudden either PTI actually starts invading Islamabad or Maulana Fazl Rahman does. So what am I supposed to do? Is it not true that a broken, battered country like Afghanistan seems to be actually wreaking havoc to Pakistan? And literally the tail is wagging the dog. If we cannot have accountability, then we should actually give up and say, okay, welcome, do whatever you want.
Right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us and being part of this special transmission. And of course, as we look back over the 10 years and remember the tragedy of APS, our hearts, of course, go out to all those who have lost their children on that day. And this is, of course, very, very horrific in Pakistan's history, but we need to remember it in order to understand that the fight against terrorism is the ultimate importance for Pakistan and the biggest priority in terms of providing safety and security to its citizens and to ensure that such a tragedy does not take place again. That's all that we have from today. Thank you for watching.